1.1 A Special Birthday. The term messy hardly does justice to the state of Laure's room on this beautiful May day. In fact, the sign, warning, room devastated by a cyclone, stuck to her door warned any brave visitor of what awaited them should they dare to step inside. Laure was slumped over her desk, a crumpled sheet of paper stuck to her cheek. Around her, chaos reigned. Open books, uncapped highlighters, scattered papers, and empty mugs stacked like trophies from a war lost before it began. The floor was so covered in class notes and school books that the colour of the carpet was impossible to see. Through the slightly open window came a spring breeze, and the chattering of 2 magpies arguing in the garden's cherry tree. Laure, sitting at her desk, didn't hear the birds' harsh cries, nor her mother's calls from downstairs. With earphones on, she gently bobbed her head to the rhythm of her favourite metal band's latest album while trying to study her geography lessons. Laure let out a loud sigh. It was hopeless. She had to read the same sentence 3 times to finally grasp its meaning. In fact, for several days now, her mind had stubbornly refused to focus on the slightest lesson. No matter how hard she tried to master them, her thoughts fluttered away like a butterfly, drifting over topics as varied as they were, unrelated to her studies, always landing in a small clearing from distant memories. Laure knew perfectly well that her anxiety was to blame for this lack of concentration, not the stress of the baccalaureate which would take place in just a month, but the fact that her birthday was drawing near. Of course, she was happy to be turning 18 soon. Among other things, she would finally be allowed to go out more often. But, as her mother constantly reminded her, she would also have to become an adult. The young girl didn't quite grasp what that word implied, but judging by the specimens of adults around her, it didn't seem very appealing. They always looked so worried about the future, especially lately. They worried about her, who still didn't know which path to take, but also about other reasons she preferred not to explore. Every evening they watched the news hoping for some good news, only to turn off the TV looking even more defeated. The world was falling apart, they said. Money had become the undisputed ruler to the point where, in the name of profit, people were thrown out onto the streets, wars were declared, and nature was ravaged. Without wanting to admit it, Laure was afraid. She, who only dreamed of hanging out with friends, video games, and movie nights, didn't feel ready to trade her carefree world for one full of overly reasonable adults. Sure, she knew that her studies would give her a few more years of reprieve, but her 18th birthday would undoubtedly mark the beginning of the end. Since she had no other choice but to cross that threshold, the soon-to-be adult decided she would make a proper farewell to childhood, and to do things right, she would dedicate an entire day to the task. The young girl closed her book with a sigh. There was no chance she'd learn anything right now. She tapped on the door of the cage that took up most of her desk. She needed someone to talk to, and her squirrel was the only one who listened without ever disagreeing. The little creature yawned as he emerged from his house, stretched lazily, grabbed the seed his owner handed him, and quickly went back to bed. Clearly, Mister wasn't in a friendly mood. "Thanks for your help," the girl muttered with a grimace. Since there was no support to be expected from the little rodent, Laure leaned back and stared at the ceiling. She nibbled the corner of her lip, as she always did when something was bothering her. All things considered, the best idea would be to make a pilgrimage to the place where she had spent the best moments of her childhood. It would be a hard choice because, thinking about it, her life had been, all in all, quite pleasant so far. Like everyone else, she'd had her share of sad moments, but above all, countless bursts of laughter, especially with her girlfriends. As she tried to make her decision, the little clearing came to her mind once again, bringing back with stunning clarity the memory of the summer she was 12. For once, her parents had allowed her to go on a camp with her two best friends, mischievous Jean and shy Annette. During that vacation, all the girls in the group had been given a nickname. Well, all except one, and of course that had to be Laure. Her elusive nature couldn't be summed up by a nickname, but back then, and still today, she was convinced that she had been so insignificant that none of the adults had even noticed her at camp, or, in their infinite kindness, hadn't dared call her Laure the insignificant. That wretched clearing couldn't be popping into her mind just to remind her of her lack of personality. Now that would have been the last straw. The young girl decided she had to figure out, once and for all, what made that damned clearing so special that it kept ruining her life. She'd been racking her brain for a while when suddenly she exclaimed, "That's it! I remember!" Laure squinted, as if that might somehow bring her memories into sharper focus. It was around August 15th. She didn't know the exact date, but it happened during the Persids. For the occasion, the girls had been allowed to spend the night under the stars. The air was so clear that Laure felt she could reach out and touch the stars. While the others squealed at each shooting star, Laure had the feeling that she, a tiny grain of sand, would one day play a role in the future of humankind. For the first and only time, she had felt perfectly in harmony with the vastness of the universe. Since that time, every day, even as the years passed, even though her mirror told her she was nothing special, even though her school reports insisted she'd never rise above average, she remained convinced that she would matter someday, and that hope must not be lost. Without a doubt, that had been the most beautiful moment of her childhood. Now, all that remained was to pick a date and convince her parents, since, just her luck, her birthday fell on an exam day, and since she didn't want to run into any weekend hikers, her getaway would take place the Monday after next. Laure rummaged nervously through her drawer and, after cursing at all the junk cluttering it, pulled out an old battered map of the region and spread it out on her desk. The map's folds were so worn that parts were unreadable, but that didn't matter. She was just about to locate the site of her pilgrimage when a distant voice mingled with that of the singer in her headphones. "Laureline Luce Valney." The girl pulled out one earbud and listened closely. She let out a quiet "ouch" upon recognizing the determined footsteps of her mother. Knowing her mother, she'd probably called for her several times before deciding to come up, which surely hadn't improved her mood. But her concern didn't last long. After all, her timing was perfect. If her mother caught her diligently studying, Laure would have a better chance of getting what she wanted. She hurriedly opened her geography book and, putting on a focused expression, waited for the door to open.